There are landscaping trends circulating right now that are costing homeowners thousands of dollars, hundreds of hours of work, and in a lot of cases, the health of their soil, their plants, and their entire garden. And the worst part? Most people don't realize it until they're already knee-deep in the mess. I've been doing this for a long time, and I've seen these trends come and go, and come back again, and I want to save you from every single one of them. Today we're going to go through 8 overrated landscaping trends that end up creating far more work than they're worth, and what to do instead. Now before we dive in, let me just say something. I don't hate trends. I really don't. Some trends start for good reasons. Somebody somewhere had a genuinely great idea. It looked beautiful in their specific situation. Somebody else photographed it, put it on the internet, and suddenly everybody wants it regardless of whether it makes any sense for their yard, their soil, their climate, or their lifestyle. That's the problem. It's not that these ideas are always bad. It's that they get applied without thinking. And that's when they become expensive, exhausting, and honestly, a little heartbreaking when you've put in all that effort and it still doesn't look the way you hoped. I've spent nearly 5 decades working in this industry, designing landscapes, building them, and then coming back years later to fix them. And I can tell you from real experience, not from a magazine or a social media feed, that the most beautiful gardens I have ever seen are almost never the ones chasing the latest look. They're the ones built on smart decisions. So let's talk about what those decisions are. And let's start with a trend that has been torturing homeowners since probably around 1980 and never seems to quit. The perfectly manicured boxwood hedge obsession. Here's the picture. Perfectly symmetrical green cubes and balls lining a driveway or framing a front door. Crisp, clean, geometric. It looks expensive. It looks intentional. And I understand why people want it. I genuinely do. But let me tell you what that picture doesn't show you. It doesn't show you the person who has to get out there every 3 to 4 weeks with shears to maintain that perfectly clipped shape. It doesn't show you the boxwood blight creeping in because dense, clipped hedges with poor air circulation are basically a welcome mat for fungal disease. And it definitely doesn't show you the bill when you have to rip the whole thing out and start over. Here's something I've said many times and I'll say it again. When we club our plants into submission, there's nothing special about them. They just look like cubes and circles and rectangles. You've taken a living plant with a naturally beautiful form and turned it into a piece of furniture. And unlike furniture, it doesn't stay that shape on its own. The real problem with this trend isn't just the labor, it's the philosophy behind it. The idea that a garden needs to be rigidly controlled to look good is actually the opposite of what makes a great garden. And boxwoods in particular have become a liability in many parts of the country because of disease pressure and pests like the boxwood leaf miner that are now widespread. You can spend years clipping and feeding and spraying, trying to keep these things looking perfect and lose them anyway. What you should be thinking about instead is selecting plants that have a naturally beautiful form and a mature size that fits the space you're putting them in. A plant that naturally grows to 4 feet wide and 3 feet tall placed in a spot that requires almost no pruning at all. It just grows into what it's supposed to be. That's the goal. That's what makes a garden low maintenance and attractive at the same time. Artificial turf as a zero maintenance solution. Okay, I want to be fair here because I know this one is popular and I know some of you already have it or are seriously considering it. So let me be balanced, and then I'm going to tell you the things the sales brochure left out. Artificial turf has its place. I'll say that honestly. Around a pool, in a small side yard where nothing grows anyway, in a play area for kids or pets where you just need a surface. There are situations where it makes sense. But the way it has been marketed as a zero-maintenance, environmentally friendly, water-saving miracle solution is, to put it kindly, an exaggeration. Let's start with maintenance, because I cannot tell you how many times I've heard someone say they put in artificial turf so they'd never have to deal with their yard again. And then, 2 years later, they're out there with a blower trying to get leaves off it, scrubbing it because their dog decided it was a bathroom, dealing with the rubber infill that's migrated to one end, or patching a section that got damaged. It is not no maintenance. It is different maintenance. Then there's the heat issue. On a hot day, artificial turf can reach surface temperatures of over 150 degrees. I have seen this with my own eyes. You cannot walk on it barefoot. Your pets absolutely cannot walk on it. And that heat radiates. It affects the plants around it. It affects the microclimate of your entire yard. And here's what nobody talks about enough. Underneath artificial turf, your soil is essentially being smothered. The living biology in your soil, the beneficial bacteria, the fungi, the nematodes, all of the life that makes a healthy landscape possible, it dies. You've paved your yard with a product that has a lifespan of around 15 to 20 years, at which point you have to pay to remove it and dispose of it. And then you have to deal with whatever is left of the soil underneath. Now, if you're in a genuine drought situation and you're trying to eliminate a lawn that you genuinely don't use, I understand the logic. But there are almost always better solutions. Decomposed granite, native ground covers, well-placed hardscape with drought-tolerant planting. Those solutions don't cook your yard in July, and they don't end up in a landfill in 20 years. River rock and decorative gravel everywhere. This one drives me a little crazy, and I'll tell you why. River rock and decorative gravel became enormously popular as a low-maintenance alternative to mulch and lawn. And I get the initial appeal. You put the rock down, you put some landscape fabric underneath, and you figure you're done forever. Right? Wrong. And here's exactly why. Within 1 to 2 seasons, organic matter, leaves, debris, wind-blown soil starts collecting in between those rocks. And that organic matter becomes a growing medium. And weeds find it. They always find it. And the kind of weeding you have to do in a river rock bed is genuinely miserable work because you can't just run a hoe through it. You're picking weeds out from between rocks one at a time. I've talked to homeowners who have spent entire weekends doing nothing else. Now add to that the landscape fabric underneath, which by the way was also sold to you as a solution to weeds. Landscape fabric works fine for about 2 years, and then roots start growing through it, debris builds up on top of it, and when you eventually try to remove it, and you will eventually try to remove it, it has become woven into the soil in a way that is incredibly difficult to deal with. And then there's heat. Rock and gravel absorb and radiate heat. In climates that get warm summers, a large expanse of river rock can make the surrounding planting area significantly hotter and drier, stressing the plants you were trying to feature. I'm not saying never use decorative rock. Used thoughtfully in the right spots, as an accent with the right plants, it can be very attractive. But as a whole yard solution sold to you under the banner of low maintenance, it is not that. Organic mulch, refreshed every few years, does a dramatically better job of suppressing weeds, moderating soil temperature, conserving moisture, and actually feeding your soil as it breaks down. It is not as permanent looking. But in landscaping, I've learned to be suspicious of anything that promises to be permanent. The wildflower meadow fantasy. I love wildflowers. I want to say that clearly because what I'm about to say might sound like I don't, and that would be inaccurate. I genuinely love them. I've designed gardens around native wildflowers for decades, and they can be absolutely spectacular. But the trend of throwing down a wildflower seed mix and expecting a meadow has led to more disappointment than almost anything else I've seen in residential landscaping. And I've seen a lot of disappointment. Here's what happens. Someone sees a gorgeous photo of a sun-drenched meadow, rolling with color, completely natural looking, apparently effortless. They buy a can of mixed wildflower seed. They scatter it around. And what they get is, and I say this with compassion, something that looks less like a meadow and more like an abandoned lot. Because the reality of establishing a wildflower planting is that it requires significant site preparation, the right species for your specific region and soil type, and a solid understanding of what is a wildflower and what is a weed. because at 2 inches tall, I promise you, they look almost identical. The other thing that isn't discussed enough is that a true meadow planting requires management. You need to know when to cut it, how low, what to leave, what to remove. Different species establish at different rates. Some of what comes up in year 1 is not what you actually planted. It takes 2 to 3 years to start looking the way you imagined, and it requires a level of plant knowledge that most homeowners, honestly, don't have yet. That's not an insult. It's just a fact. And a good landscape professional should be telling you that up front instead of just selling you the dream. If you want the feel of a naturalistic garden, there are ways to get there that are more manageable and more reliably beautiful. Selecting a small number of native flowering plants that are proven in your area, planting them in mass groupings, and letting them grow in their natural form. That approach gives you the look, supports pollinators and wildlife, and doesn't require you to become a botanist to maintain it. Raised garden bed. Overload. Raised beds are genuinely a good idea. I want to be upfront about that. For vegetable growing, for areas with poor soil, for gardeners with mobility issues, raised beds are often the right solution. But somewhere along the way, raised beds became a status symbol. And now people are building them all over their yards, filling them with expensive soil, and then realizing they've created an irrigation challenge, a watering obligation, and in some cases, a full-time job. Here's the issue. Raised beds dry out faster than in-ground plantings. Significantly faster. Especially if they're built with wood, which breathes, and especially in warm climates. Which means your watering demands go up considerably. And if you've built a dozen of them across your backyard, because you saw someone on the internet with a gorgeous homestead setup, you now have a dozen separate zones of soil drying out at different rates, needing different amendments, different crops, different care schedules. I have seen people spend $4,000 and $5,000 building out an elaborate raised bed garden and then abandon it by the second summer because they underestimated what it takes to keep it going. The soil needs to be refreshed. The irrigation needs to be set up properly. The crop rotation needs to be managed. The pests that find a concentrated planting of vegetables are not shy about showing up. None of that means don't do raised beds, it means do them thoughtfully. Start with 2 or 3. Learn the watering. Get the soil right. Use a good organic fertilizer that feeds both your plants and the soil biology. Build from there. The people who have genuinely beautiful, productive raised bed gardens didn't build 12 of them in a weekend. They built a few, learned from them, and expanded carefully. The more plants equals a better garden. Mindset. I have been guilty of this one myself, so I say it with full self-awareness. There is something irresistible about a nursery on a Saturday morning in spring. Everything is green. Everything is flowering. Everything looks like exactly what your garden needs. And so you buy it. All of it. And then you go home and you find spots for it. And at first it looks great because everything is small and there's plenty of space. And then it grows. And then it keeps growing. Overcrowding is one of the most common and most costly mistakes in landscaping. And it happens at every level, from the home gardener to professionals who should know better. When plants are too close together, they compete for water, for nutrients, for light. Airflow between plants is reduced, which means fungal disease becomes a much bigger problem. And the pruning required to keep everything from engulfing everything else becomes relentless. What we like to do, and this is something I'd encourage you to think about seriously, is come up with a fairly small plant palette and then use it in bold ways. When you mass plants, meaning you group multiples of the same plant together, you get a much more dramatic and intentional effect than you do from one of everything crammed together. And you actually end up with less work because your care is simplified and your plants have room to grow into their natural form. The discipline of planning before you plant is what separates a garden that looks effortless from a garden that looks like a collection of impulse purchases. And I say that kindly. I have made those impulse purchases. Most of us have. But the goal is to do the thinking first. Understand the mature size of every plant you're putting in. Understand the spacing it needs. And then plant accordingly. Even if it looks a little sparse in the beginning, it won't look sparse for long. Elaborate water features. I want to tell you a story. Early in my career, we installed a beautiful, elaborate water feature for a client. Waterfall, recirculating stream, a pond, the whole thing. It was genuinely stunning when we finished it. The client was thrilled. And then, about 18 months later, we got a call. The pump had failed, algae had taken over, there were mosquito larvae in the still water at the edges, and a neighborhood cat had been visiting regularly to fish out whatever was living in there. It had become, and I'm choosing my words carefully here, a situation. Water features are one of those trends that photograph magnificently and live less magnificently in real life unless you go into them with your eyes completely open about what they require. Pumps need maintenance. Filters need cleaning. Water chemistry needs to be managed if you have fish or if you're trying to prevent algae. Leaks happen. Debris accumulates. In winter, depending on your climate, they need to be shut down and managed properly. And if something goes wrong and the recirculating system fails, still water in a warm climate becomes a mosquito breeding ground faster than you would believe. None of this means water features are a bad idea. A simple, well-designed bubbler or a small self-contained fountain with a quality pump and a covered reservoir can be very low maintenance and genuinely lovely. The problem is when people see an elaborate waterfall installation on a home improvement show and decide to recreate it on a Saturday with a kit from the home improvement store. If you want a water feature, start simple. Understand the maintenance requirements before you commit. And if you're going to invest in something larger, work with someone who has actually built and maintained them long enough to be honest with you about what it takes. Planting. Only for aesthetics, ignoring the site. This is, in my opinion, the most expensive mistake in landscaping. And it's woven into almost every other trend on this list. The habit of choosing plants, or any landscaping element, based purely on how it looks in a photo or at the nursery, without asking whether it's right for the specific conditions of the specific site it's going into. The proper way to do plant selection is in response to a lot of things that come before it. Analyzing the site, understanding the sun exposure, knowing the soil type, understanding how that area drains, because drainage problems that aren't addressed before planting will defeat everything else you do, every single time. Understanding what the mature size of the plant will be and whether that works in this space. Understanding the water requirements and whether they match your climate and your irrigation situation. A plant that's native to or well adapted to your specific area, placed in conditions that suit it, will thrive with minimal input. The same plant placed in the wrong spot will struggle, require constant intervention, invite pests and disease, and eventually fail. And then you start over. I've seen homeowners plant the same spot 3 times in 5 years because they kept picking based on what looked beautiful at the nursery without doing the analysis first. And every time, it cost them money, time, and frustration. A great example is people planting large trees, and I'm talking about trees that ultimately grow to 30 or 40 feet, in small front yard spaces because they loved how they looked as young trees in a pot. Within 10 years, those trees are cracking foundations, lifting sidewalks, blocking views, and creating conflicts with utilities. And by then, removal is not cheap. The analysis of the site isn't the exciting part of landscaping. I understand that. Picking plants is the exciting part. But the analysis is what makes everything else work, and once you develop the habit of doing it, it actually becomes interesting because you start to understand your garden as a system. And systems, when they're well designed, take care of themselves. What to do, instead of chasing trends. So if not the trends, then what? Let me give you a simple philosophy that I've developed over nearly 5 decades of doing this work, and I think it applies to every single situation we've talked about today. Start with the site. Before you pick a single plant, before you look at a single photo for inspiration, understand the place you're working with. How does it drain? What kind of soil do you have? Where does the sun hit and for how long? What's the microclimate like? Is it hotter than the rest of the yard? Or cooler? Or wetter? That information is the foundation of every good decision that follows. Then think about use. How are you going to use this space? Are people going to walk through it, sit in it, play in it, grow food in it? What you want to do in a space determines what should go into it, far more reliably than what you saw on the internet last Tuesday. Then, and only then, think about plants. And when you do, think about plants that are adapted to your area, that have a natural, mature size appropriate for the space, and that you find genuinely beautiful in their natural form. Not a clipped form, not a form they'll only have for 3 weeks after you prune them. Their natural form. Build your soil. This is the part most people skip, and it is the most important long-term investment you can make in your landscape. Soil full of life. Beneficial bacteria, beneficial fungi, good nematodes. That soil will feed your plants, fight off pests and disease, manage water better, and reduce the amount of intervention you need to make year after year. Compost, earthworm castings, organic products that feed the biology rather than bypassing it. That's what builds a garden that gets easier over time instead of harder. Use organic mulch. Not gravel, not landscape fabric, not artificial ground cover. Good organic mulch, refreshed every few years, is one of the highest value things you can do for a landscape. It suppresses weeds, conserves moisture, moderates soil temperature, and feeds the soil as it breaks down. It is not glamorous. It does not photograph as dramatically as river rock, but it works better than almost anything else at the same cost or less. And finally, give yourself permission to keep it simple. The most beautiful gardens I have ever been in, the ones that made me stop and actually feel something, were not complicated. They were thoughtful. There's a significant difference. Complicated usually means more work. Thoughtful usually means less. And the goal of good landscaping, at the end of the day, is to create something that you love being in, not something that owns you. If anything I said today saved you from making one of these mistakes, then this video did its job. And if you've already made some of them, look, you're in good company. I've been doing this for decades and I've made a few of them myself. The point isn't to feel bad about what's already in the ground. The point is to make better decisions going forward. If you want more of this kind of practical, honest advice about landscaping and gardening, the kind that actually helps you make smarter decisions and spend less time fighting your yard, go ahead and subscribe. We put out new videos every week and they are completely free. There's no reason not to. And next time, we're going to talk about the biggest watering mistakes homeowners make and exactly how to fix them. Because a lot of what people think is a plant problem is actually a water problem in disguise. You don't want to miss that one.